The bell over the door chimed in the rain, the same hopeless sound it always made. I didn't look up. I was counting the rings in the old oak counter, tracing my finger along a dark groove. It was him. It was always him on Thursdays at 6:40. The smell of wet wool and cold pavement arrived a moment before he did. "Just coffee. Black, please." His voice was low, a quiet rumble under the drum of the Seattle downpour. I poured it, the steam rising between us like a veil. He left a $5 bill on the counter for a $2 coffee. Every single time. I used to think it was arrogance. I learned it was loneliness. A kind I recognized. We didn't speak for weeks. Just the rain, the coffee, the soft clink of the cup on the saucer. It was a shared silence, heavy and comfortable, like a blanket we were both hiding under. Then one Thursday, the rain was apocalyptic, rivers rushing in the gutters. He looked at the window, then at me, his eyes the color of the storm gray sound. "Looks like we're the only two people who didn't get the memo to build an ark." I laughed. It surprised me, the sound of it. Or we're the only two stupid enough to be out in it. That was the crack. After that, the silence shattered into a million beautiful pieces. The quiet man who tipped too much had a name. Leo. He had dreams that scared me. He talked about mountains in Patagonia, midnight sun in Norway, deserts that stretched to the edge of the world. His words were maps, and he was always pointing to the horizon. I talked about my mom's mortgage, the leak in my apartment ceiling, the deep, aching want for a garden, for roots. We fell in love in that coffee shop, surrounded by the smell of beans and the sound of rain, knowing with every fiber that we were loving each other toward an ending. The night he told me about the offer, the air left the room. A 2-year contract, infrastructure engineering, Kazakhstan. "Come with me, Mia," he said, his hands cradling my face, his thumbs wiping away tears I hadn't even felt fall. "We'll make it an adventure." I looked past him, at my reflection in the dark window. I saw the girl who'd waited tables to put herself through community college, the daughter who sent money home every month, the woman who had finally built a life that didn't tremble. My heart screamed yes, but my soul was a quiet, stubborn thing. It whispered of resentment blooming in a foreign apartment, of love curdling into blame under a strange sky. The letting go. It wasn't a dramatic scene. It was quiet. It was the finality in my own voice that shocked me. "I can't," I whispered. The words felt like glass in my throat. "I love you too much to watch you give this up, and I love myself too much to give up what I've built." He didn't fight me. That was the worst part. He just looked at me, and in his eyes I saw he understood. He kissed my forehead, a blessing and a goodbye. I stood behind that counter, watching him walk out into the rain for the last time, and I felt a part of my own heart walk out with him, drenched and disappearing into the Seattle night. Years are not kind. They are long, and they are heavy. I struggled. The coffee shop changed hands, and I fought to keep my job, eventually becoming the manager. It was a small victory that felt hollow. I heard through vague mutual friends that Leo was thriving, conquering those horizons he'd dreamed of. I carried the ghost of him, in the smell of rain, in the sound of the bell on the door at 6:40, in the empty space in my bed that never felt warm. Then came a winter evening, the kind where the dark comes early and the streetlights glow like hazy moons in the mist. The shop was quiet, just the soft hiss of the espresso machine. I was in the back, counting receipts, the numbers blurring. The bell chimed. I walked out, a polite smile already on my face, and the world stopped. He was standing there, just inside the door, shaking rain from a coat that was older, more worn. He was older, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, a quietness in his posture that wasn't just tiredness, it was a stillness. The frantic energy that used to vibrate around him was gone, settled. Our eyes met. There was no gasp, no dropped cup, just a silence so profound it had its own sound, a ringing in my ears, the hammering of my own heart. "Mia," he said, just my name. But in that one word, I heard a decade of distance, of oceans and mountains and silent, empty rooms. "Leo." My voice was a stranger's. He didn't come closer. He just stood there, as if waiting for permission to exist in this space again. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, the ghost of his old smile touching his lips. "Thought I'd see if the coffee was still as good." I moved behind the counter on autopilot, my hands trembling as I reached for a cup. The familiar motions were an anchor. I poured his coffee. Black. My hands were steady now. I slid it across the counter to him. He reached for his wallet. I shook my head. "On the house." He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. He took a sip, then set the cup down. He looked around the shop, then back at me. "You're still here." "I'm still here." He took a slow breath, his gaze dropping to the steam rising from his cup. "I went everywhere, Mia. I saw all of it. The mountains, they were just rock. The deserts, just sand. The cities, just noise." His voice grew softer, raw. I kept waiting to feel like I'd arrived, like I was home. I never did. He finally looked up, and his eyes were clear, honest, and full of a pain I knew all too well. The only place that ever felt like home was a coffee shop in Seattle. The only person was you. The air between us wasn't charged with the old, desperate passion. It was thick with something else, recognition, a profound, aching understanding. This time, love didn't rush in to fill the silence. It just stood there with us. It waited. "I'm not the same," I said, needing him to know. "Neither am I. I have a life here. It's small, but it's mine." "I'm not asking you to leave it," he said. "I'm just asking if I can sit here for a while, and maybe we can just talk. No promises of forever, just honesty." He pulled out the old stool at the end of the counter, the one he'd always used. He sat down, not as a customer, not as a ghost, but as a man who had finally stopped running. I leaned against the back counter, my arms crossed, not in defense, but in wonder. The rain traced slow paths down the window. The coffee steamed between us. And for the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like the beginning of a conversation we were finally ready to have. I didn't sit with him that first night. I couldn't. It felt like stepping off a cliff. So I busied myself, wiping already clean counters, refilling sugar jars, my back to him. But I felt his presence like a change in barometric pressure. A solid, quiet weight in the corner of my world again. After 20 minutes, he stood, his stool scraping softly. "Closing time?" "Yeah," I said, my voice tight. He nodded, zipping his coat. He paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "Same time next Thursday?" he asked, and it wasn't a line. It was a question, raw and hopeful, hanging in the damp air. My throat closed. I managed a small nod. He left. I locked the door behind him, my forehead pressed against the cool glass, watching his figure dissolve into the winter mist until there was nothing left but the echo of his question. That week was a kind of torture. Every memory I'd carefully boxed up and stored away broke free, playing in a chaotic loop. The sound of his laugh, the way he'd look at me when I was talking, like I was mapping the stars, the devastating emptiness of my apartment after he left. I was terrified. Terrified of hoping, terrified of that specific, unique pain only he could bring back. Thursday came, heavy with a forecast of rain. At 6:35, my hands were shaking. I almost told my assistant to close up, but I didn't. At 6:40, the bell chimed. He was there. Same coat, a hesitant smile. "Black coffee, please." This time, I made two. I placed his on the counter, and then, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, I walked around the counter. I pulled out the stool next to him and sat down. The distance between us was just a few feet of worn wooden floor, but it felt like I'd crossed a continent. He let out a breath, a soft, shaky sound of relief. "You're here." "I'm here," I echoed. We didn't talk about the past, not yet. We talked about the present. He told me he was consulting now, working remotely. He'd rented a small apartment in Belltown. He'd gotten a dog, a rescued mutt named Barnaby, who was afraid of his own shadow. I told him about my mom finally paying off her house, about my failed attempt at growing tomatoes on my fire escape. We talked about books, about the terrible new city architect, about the relentless Seattle gray. It was ordinary. It was everything. That became our new ritual. Thursdays at 6:40, not as owner and customer, but as two people sharing a table. The conversations deepened, layer by careful layer. One night, under the soft glow of the pendant lights, he finally spoke of the unspoken. "I was angry for a long time," he said, his voice low. He traced the rim of his cup. "Not at you, at myself, for thinking the grandeur was out there. I thought fulfillment was a summit you could reach. It's not, it's the quiet moments in between the climbing." He looked at me. "I missed 1,000 quiet moments with you. That's what I regret." Tears welled in my eyes, hot and sudden. "I thought of you every day," I confessed, the admission feeling dangerous and necessary. "I'd see a travel show or a photo of some mountain, and I'd wonder if you were there. And part of me was happy for you. The other part, it just ached." He reached across the table then, slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. His hand covered mine. His skin was warm, slightly rough, a working hand. The contact was an electric shock, a jolt of pure, undiluted memory and present feeling. I didn't pull away. I turned my hand over and laced my fingers with his. We sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just letting the simple, profound truth of the connection flow back between us. It wasn't a dramatic reunion. There was no sweeping kiss in the rain, not then. It was a slow reconstruction. He met Barnaby, who promptly hid under my couch. I cooked him dinner in my tiny kitchen, and he washed the dishes. We took walks along the waterfront, the same paths we'd walked years before, but now our strides matched perfectly, our silence comfortable. Months passed. Spring began to whisper at the edges of the evergreens. One Thursday, he didn't come at 6:40. A cold dread settled in my stomach. Had I dreamed it all? Had he remembered who he was and run again? At 7:15, the bell chimed. He rushed in, breathless, his hair messy. "Barnaby," he panted. "Got out of his harness, chased a squirrel into a blackberry thicket. I just finally got him home and cleaned up." The relief that washed through me was oceanic. It wasn't that he'd left. It was that his life, with its mundane, messy emergencies, was now happening here. He was building a life here. "Come on," I said, grabbing my coat. "Let's go check on him." We walked to his apartment, a quiet, sunlit space with maps still on the walls, but now also dog toys and a comfortable couch. Barnaby, sporting a few scratches, wagged his tail feebly. Leo made tea. We sat on the floor, our backs against the couch, the dog between us. He looked at me, the soft evening light painting his face in gold. "Mia," he said, his voice so serious it made my breath catch. "I'm not asking you to marry me. I'm not asking you to merge bank accounts or even to let me keep a toothbrush at your place. A small, genuine smile touched his lips. I'm just asking, can we try? Not the frantic, world-ending romance we had before, but the slow, quiet, building a life kind. The kind where we choose each other every single day without any grand promises except the promise to show up. I looked at this man, my dreamer who had finally come home, not in defeat, but in wisdom. I saw the future not as a thrilling, uncertain adventure across continents, but as a series of Thursday nights, of rescued dogs, of shared silences and honest words. It looked like peace. It looked like home. I reached out and took his hand, bringing it to my lips and pressing a kiss to his knuckles. A simple, sure gesture. Yes, I said, and for the first time, the word held no fear, no sacrifice, no goodbye hovering in its shadow. It was just a beginning. Let's just show up. And we did.